Hello and welcome to another podcast, Neurodiversity with Theo Smith, where we explore the complexities of the human mind and the life experiences that go with it. And we've always got incredible people coming on to share their life experiences, how they've connected the dots between who they are and how their brain works. And we're still all on that journey, right? None of us have really fully uncovered what the magic is behind the human brain. But today I've had somebody come out who's reached out to me. This story is fascinating. And one thing that I love about it is the commitment to writing a book, because I know that well. Me and Amanda, goodness gracious me, we're on the second book. And sometimes I wake up in a panic mode thinking, why am I doing this? So I've got a lot of admiration for Sadie, I guess, today for going on that journey. But also some of the subtopics we're going to talk about in terms of neurodiversity and neuroinclusion today around aphantasia and face blindness are things that I'm fascinated by and very interested in, and certainly impacted in certain ways in terms of my own personal experiences. So really excited to find out and explore Sadie's background. So without further ado, today we have Sadie on the podcast. Sadie, do you want to introduce yourself to our wonderful audience and let them know a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Sadie Dingfelder, and I used to work at the Washington Post. Now I'm a freelance writer, and I'm a science writer. And while I'm on the job, at my old job, I made some pretty weird mistakes where I failed to recognize people I had been interviewing just minutes earlier. And that sort of clued me into the fact that something might be a little different about how I recognize faces.
Amazing. And see, isn't that funny? Because there's me going around the anxiety of writing, and your life has been writing.
Right.
So, like, I should be taking tips from you, because if anybody should have like cracked it by now, at least having the confidence to get the words out there, you should be the one. But so tell us more about that, because I imagine that can be massively anxiety inducing when your life is around communicating with people, talking with people, remembering who people are.
Yeah.
How
It's
did you
so,
find that?
I know. When I found out that I was face blind, I kind of, at first, I wanted to kind of keep it secret because I was afraid that my coworkers would think I was bad at my job, or maybe, but luckily, I mean, I'm not really an investigative reporter. I mean, I'm a science writer. So I don't have to rely on face recognition like to in the fundamental way. I don't think I'd be a great investigative reporter for that reason. But yeah, but it's so funny because now that I think about it, and I've thought about it a lot, obviously, I realize that being face blind is actually great training for being a reporter, because I am very, very friendly to everyone, because anyone could be like a good friend or even a parent of mine. So I'm just like blanket super friendly to people, and I also am very good and quick at connecting with strangers. And those are two really good abilities for a reporter. So I actually feel like I got a couple rare um benefits from my strange brain.
Well, absolutely, and that's the thing. So the face blindness thing really connects with me, because I know for a fact I really struggle with recognition of faces,
Oh,
names,
really?
dates. Um, I definitely have to have like patterns or connections to remember people. There has to be like um, I used to be an actor, and I used to remember my lines only once I got on my feet. I couldn't remember them sat down like everybody else. I had to get on my feet, and I
Oh,
remembered them by movement. I didn't remember the
uh-huh.
lines by like most other people. I remembered them by the movements that I was making and connected them with the emotions and the movements. And I think there's
Yeah.
something similar for me with faces or dates or names and everything else. Unless I can connect it to something else that
Right.
embeds it in my brain, it ain't there. And and and
Right.
it and it may be there for a short while if I don't do something like that, but it'll be gone very quickly. Like you said, the next day, or it could be the next week or the next month, unless it's like unless somebody's done something really strange that like I can't get their face out of my brain. Might be the other thing. How does it manifest itself for you? And when you started to understand that this was a thing for you, what did you do to explore it? How did you understand it? Give us some of the journey you experienced.
Yeah. Well, so I sort of the big moment in my life when I was like, you know what, I'm making mistakes that neurotypical people do not make. Because I thought I was 100% neurotypical, and I discovered I am extremely not neurotypical. But because, like, I mean, I'm pretty good at making up for and working around my unusual brain. So anyway, so what happened was I was in the grocery store, grocery shopping with my husband. Well, now he's my husband. He was my boyfriend at the time. And he just grabbed a jar of generic peanut butter off of a shelf, and he tossed it into the basket. And Steve doesn't buy generic usually. And so I picked it up and I said, "Since when do you buy Safeway Select peanut butter?" And it turned out I grabbed this jar of peanut butter out of some other man's basket, because I had lost track of Steve. He was somewhere else in the store. And so I was just like accosting a random person and harassing them about their grocery selections. And later I realized that I was faster to recognize the wrong label on a peanut butter jar than the wrong face on my husband. And the drive home, I was just like, you know what? Normal people don't make this kind of mistake. And so I started Googling, and kind of ironically, I am a science writer specializing in neuroscience. So I know about face blindness. Yeah. I've written about perceptual disorders, and I just never thought that to apply it to myself. Until I did. And even then though, okay, so then I started emailing scientists, and and I got into the study at Harvard. And it had brain scans. I had tons of tests. I went up twice, and I was still shocked when I found out I was face blind. Even though all the evidence was really piling up and I knew about it, I was still completely floored, because I thought I was going to come out as like kind of below average, but like I was in the bottom 2%, on par with what one of my favorite scientists said, a below average or mediocre macaque, which is a monkey.
Wow, you really smashed it.
Yeah, I'm so bad.
So what's interesting, and this is something I've not explored enough, and maybe you'll provide me with some insights with your research, and maybe this is just another area to explore. But I definitely have the challenges with the face blindness, names, dates, and all of that. So there's lots that I struggle with in terms of the working memory. I like to call it a busy working memory rather than a poor working memory. Whatever, right? It's struggling with working memory, fine. But I also took a test for super recognizers. Now, I
Uh-huh.
don't know whether you know much about super recognizers, but super recognizers, the police force use them to
Yeah.
identify people because they're better than AI at the moment at identifying
Right.
people. Because often images are bad, right? Images, they may be off like a thing on the front door that's a cheap camera that's Amazon or whatever, right? But they're not good images all the time. And therefore, people, these super recognizers with this big central part of the brain, they are better than the computers at going, that person is the same person as that person. Now,
Yeah.
I scored 100% in that test. And
What? Oh,
yeah,
wow.
but the test provides you with an image of somebody and then says, find this person in these next, 10 groups of images. So what I've got a great ability to do is to look at somebody and then find them in 10 images immediately after. What I couldn't do is if you showed me a person and then they walked into the room, I'd have no idea that that person is the person I just looked at. But when I'm given the
Wow.
specific task, what I'm actually doing is I'm connecting maybe that I can see the same nose or what I'm doing is I'm spotting features, shapes, rather than the face, right? And
Yeah.
so my ability is not to recognize faces, it's to recognize similarities, even when it's this person is 60 but I'm recognizing them as a 10-year-old, right?
Yeah.
But it is not in the face. It is in the bits and pieces that make the face up. So I've not had the brain scan or anything else to know any deeper. But these are the incredible things that fascinates me about the human mind, that this does not mean that.
Right.
Because
Yeah, there's a lot of places in the process where your face recognition can break down, and there's a lot of different ways to be face blind. Yeah. So, what honestly it sounds like to me is that you can do it, but you have to be directed or prompted to do the task. And you won't just do it automatically, maybe.
yeah, and I think it's the immediacy of it. Is that the right word? It's how quick it happens.
Short term,
Um,
yeah.
Yeah, and so if I'm asked to do something immediately, then my brain has not had the chance to get busy with all this other stuff, and therefore I can,
Ah,
like, if I meet somebody and the next time I meet them again, or a week later, I have no idea who this person is unless it's been a meaningful thing. So let me bring that on to,
yeah.
because I know face blindness is just one element of what we're talking about here, right? Because I also know that there are other incredible ways that your fantastic brain is working. And as you went on this lovely journey, it must have been like opening up Pandora's box or whatever, something of interest, where other things started to come out that you started to go, well, if I'm that, maybe tell us about some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't believe I was 39 years old when I discovered I was face blind. And I thought, you know what, being middle-aged kind of sucks. But at least I know myself. Like at least I got that down. And then I didn't have that down. I didn't know myself at all. And once I discovered that there was this huge thing about me that I'd been overlooking, I just had to keep digging, right? And so face blindness is usually genetic. It really runs in families. You can also get it through brain damage. But people, but no one in my family is face blind. Everyone's very good at recognizing faces. So I did some more research and I discovered that I'm pretty sure the reason why I'm face blind is because I got a little brain damaged during birth. No big deal. It happens to a lot of people. And I hope my parents don't hear this podcast. As a result, I ended up with something called amblyopia, strabismus, lazy eye, whatever. It has a lot of names. But basically, I only look out of one eye at a time. So my world is super flat. And people with my specific type of um, amblyopia often are face blind. So I think that's like the smoking
Wow.
gun, or at least one of them.
Well, that is fascinating. And so tell us a bit more about those other impacting factors. So I know you've mentioned aphantasia.
Yeah.
And is that something that impacts you? And how does that manifest itself?
Yeah. So, interestingly, so I feel like that was like one sort of mini story. And then the other mini story in my book is I discovered that, so aphantasia, as you and your listeners probably already know, is where you can't visualize at all. And I, like many people who can't visualize, had no idea that other people really could. We thought that everyone was being metaphorical when they said things like imagine an audience with their underwear on,
Yeah.
or in yoga class, or imagine yourself on a beach. All of these things we thought were 100% just like, I'm thinking that it might be possible for people to be naked, or I'm thinking that perhaps I could be on a beach. And we didn't realize that people could actually bring up sort of a sensory image, like almost a visual image, or maybe other senses get involved. And so anyway, so I didn't realize this. And while I was doing all this research, I come across aphantasia because it does tend to be comorbid with face blindness. And in fact, I didn't realize other people could bring up mental images of faces they'd seen before, because I can't do that. And I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, is this why like I really like, it just made a lot of sense because I've been collecting photos my whole life. I make photo albums. I'm always looking at them, and because I can't remember what anyone looks like. And so if I'm by myself, it's almost like I may as well always have been by myself. And I've never had friends because I can't bring them up in my memory.
Brilliant. And there's many notable people who are artists, like Glenn Keane, one of the most
Yeah.
famous Disney artists. And aphantasia sounds a bit Disney, right? That's itself. It
Yeah.
sounds like aphantasia of Aphantasia. Um, and the fact that when we think about the images of Disney, we think about big eyes, we think about big smiles, and I just think like the concept of creating images like that, even if you can't visualize what a smile is, you can feel what happens when you smile, right? The cheekbones go up, the eyes crease. There's this, and so the method of creating art is another method other than seeing it in your mind's eye, and so this fascinates me because it's the other thing that I've done quite a bit of research on is the Mexican tetra blind cavefish. And the Mexican tetra cavefish, when it got pushed into the darkened caves of Mexico, became blind because it was dark and it needed to survive to use up less energy. Eventually, it got rid of its eyes completely because that meant that it saved huge amounts of energy, because even the processing of images takes up a lot of energy. So now when we think about that in the human context, because actually our eyes are not that dissimilar from tetra fish, believe it or not, um, we're thinking about energy saving. And when you put that into human evolution, you specifically talk about brain trauma there. So I'm already thinking, like, what is your body doing? How are you evolving and adapting to ensure that your body is optimized for survival, right? And and not processing these images is actually energy saving. And so, I'm not a scientist on this space. I'm just fascinated by the concept of what we do and why we do it. We have too little understanding of it. But what it does mean is it gives you the ability to see and process the world, process the world in a very different way to that person next to you. And that absolutely will provide a different result at the end of it. So if from a strengths perspective, and did you write much about that in the book, and how maybe initially you're like, whoa, this can't be me. I can't be impacted, to, well, actually, this is why I'm incredible and why I'm me and why I do really well in what I do.
Yeah, that's totally the trajectory I ended up on. Yeah, I guess it's kind of common, maybe, but yeah. So when you were mentioning Glenn Keane, who did The Little Mermaid and other Disney films, so one thing that I thought was really interesting about him that I identified with is that he would start every painting with a single brush stroke, or every drawing, and because he doesn't have that mind's eye, so he's not deciding ahead of time what he's going to do. He would just do a random mark, and then he would react to his own work and sort of go from there. And as a result, he ended up with these amazing angles that no one else would think of. And so I feel like I'm a little bit similar. I can't draw at all, but as a writer, because I don't have any internal monologue either. And so I don't have like any sort of, I have no idea what I'm thinking until I write it down on the page. And that's why I think I really enjoy writing, because as I'm like typing out my thoughts, I'm like, ooh, good one, Sadie. Like, that was smart. Who knew you thought that? So, and like also, as you write, you like combine ideas and figure out new ways to, anyway. But for me, writing is really natural because it is just sort of the only way I've ever had, and speaking are the two ways I have to know what I'm thinking. And it's a fun discovery process for me.
And it's immediate. What you're telling me is it's immediate. It's like almost this immediate sense of gratification of being able to
Yeah.
explore feelings, emotions, ideas, concepts, just like a flood of this coming out all at once.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, though, I'm very organized too. Like, usually when I write a story, it just comes out and it's pretty good. Like, it doesn't require a lot of restructuring or anything. And, um, and so, my understanding is like that's not typical for writers. So I kind of think that I have, my brain does a lot of behind the scenes work that I am not cognitively, consciously aware of. And then I get to like, find out what it's been up to.
Brilliant. And in terms of aphantasia, just very briefly, my cousin did a film on it.
Oh, wow.
He's a small film producer, and he did a film, and he interviewed a variety of people. One was an artist, who's quite prominent on social media channels. And she produces quite a lot of content on aphantasia. But the other was, part of the focus was on a young person who'd lost their mum and how that affected the family, and how their response to the loss of their mum was very different to the other siblings. And
Oh,
because they
wow.
didn't get immediately triggered by talking about it, because they weren't visualizing it, and a lot of the trauma with situations like that is the visual memory. It can also be
Yeah.
smells or other, things that can trigger you. But for a lot of people, it is like remembering that image of being sat somewhere with your parent, your loved one, and that image is overwhelming. And obviously, early on in that trauma of losing somebody, it can make you cry, for example. And when you've
Yeah.
got somebody who isn't crying because they're not visualizing, there's an assumption that they don't care. And I think that journey was fascinating, that he explored that idea, that this is where we can start to, you mentioned it about worrying around how your fellow co-workers would now see you. And this is
Oh,
one of the
yeah. Yeah.
challenges we have, right? That maybe they will, that is the problem. Maybe there will be a lack of understanding, a lack of empathy, because they make us all kinds of assumptions around what that now means for you, your
Yeah.
capability, your feelings, your emotions, what you can and can't do. And then they start pinning everything you've ever done to, oh, that's why she might have done this, or that's why she did that, or that's why she forgot to do this. And I guess there's a lot of fear still amongst people at Sheerness. Do you think that was some of the reasons and the catalyst for writing the book? What was the main driver for you to not just? I know you're a writer by heart, so it must have been lovely to do it, but there must have been a
Yeah.
bigger driver, right? Why did you need to get that book? And tell us a little bit more about the book.
Yeah. Okay. So my book is called "Do I Know You?" ? A FaceBlind reporter's journey into the science of sight, memory, and imagination. And I just actually feel really lucky to have a brain that interested, like, I'm going to say at least 6 or 7 different teams of researchers across the United States. I had people at Harvard, 2 different teams at Harvard, Berkeley, University of Chicago, University of Toronto, like
Oh,
it.
you're just showing off now. Come on. I love it though.
You know what's
Brilliant.
fun? You know what's really funny though is that I kind of like started to think of all these scientists as my friends, and then when they were done with me, I didn't hear from them, and I'm like, oh, they only cared about my brain. But yeah, I mean, I got to go all across the country. I got all these tests and things, and the coolest thing that I learned while I was doing this, well, I learned about how vision works, and hopefully, I tried to explain it in really simple but accurate ways, and what happens when vision goes wrong, and why most humans are basically, they have a photographic memory for faces, because you have a whole chunk of brain devoted 100% to face recognition and nothing else, right? It's right above your ears. It's like about the chunk size of an olive. And that's all it does is faces. There's not anything that specific going on in your brain. Like, usually things in your brain are across vast networks. It's very complicated. Face recognition, at least in part, is quite localized. And so neuroscientists love this because they can, like, go and tap individual neurons and see exactly how your brain is computing faces. And anyway, it turns out that we all have sort of a generic average face, like a platonic ideal face. And then every face you see, you measure how far that face is from your platonic ideal face in various dimensions. So, oh, like, this person's eyes are a little bit closer set than my generic face in my mind, or this person's nose is longer, whatever. Anyway, so yeah, so my book is sort of follows my very nerdy midlife crisis, where I discover, one after another, all these ways that my world is radically different than other people's world. Like, my visual world, if you could beam into my brain, you would be completely shocked by how flat everything is. And, and then if you could if you could experience my mind, I think most people would find it to be very peaceful and maybe very boring, because I have no internal monologue. I can't visualize. It's very like sort of zen in there, not a lot above my level of consciousness. So anyway, the point is though, is that I make the same mistake as everyone else, which is that I assumed that my inner experience was pretty much the norm. And so that caused me to make a lot of assumptions about other people's behavior that were very, very wrong. So for instance, one of my best friends, her name is Miriam, and she has this guy she broke up with like years ago that she's still thinking about. And like to me, that is completely nuts because I one time broke up with a guy who lived with me. He had lived with me for years. Broke up with him, ran into him on the street less than a month later, and I felt nothing, and it was amazing. And all I had to do was hide his photos. And as soon as I hid the photos, it was like his whole memory, or my memory of our whole relationship was just like a Polaroid left out in the sun, which is kind of sad that I can do that maybe, but um but that's what I can do if I choose to. And so to me, Miriam is like being a drama queen on purpose. And I didn't understand that this guy lives in her mind, that she can visualize him in like, sensory detail. And I mean, honestly, I'm a little jealous because like, why leave the house at that point? But yeah, so I've learned so much about myself, but really what I've learned is about a lot of everyone else too, just because I assumed that everyone was like me and I was super wrong.
I do find that incredibly fascinating. And when I think about my own challenges with memory, then I think possibly less face blindness and more chaos in my brain. That means I really struggle to recognize somebody rather than face blindness, possibly. The chaos
Right.
is more
Right.
impactful than anything else. And that's why I'm able, maybe in a very tight space of time, to be able to make those connections, but just beyond it, maybe not. The other thing I find fascinating is the use case. Because my background is in HR and talent and people, I'm always
Yeah.
thinking, what are the mechanisms of getting the best out of ourselves, right? What's the use case for us as a human being? Why do we matter? Why are we here? Surely we must have some kind of use. And therefore, when I think of some of the things that you're describing, the ability, for example, to go into an environment, we know the world is a bit of a mess here and there, right? And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of chaos going on in the world, and there's a lot of people suffering and struggling. And there's a lot of people who go into these environments of suffer and struggle, and they want to help. They may be a nurse, a doctor, they may be somebody who just wants to come in and provide food, nutrition, whatever, or a teacher, well, I don't know, a taxi driver, whoever, whatever. But there's people who are going into these environments, and then they're coming out of these environments and they have the internal monologue. They have the visual image. They have the
Mm.
trauma that they then may struggle with for the rest of their lives. Um, imagine the use case for somebody like yourself who may not have those things, and how, with the other protections for the individual, if they were a doctor or physician, whatever, or uh, those individuals may be much more better equipped to go into certain environments to help, and maybe not suffer so much from the visual trauma because of those. And again, I don't know, but I just think, how many opportunities are there for the different ways that we process and see the world, that we're
Yeah.
allowing people like you and I to accidentally trip over it and then think, oh, this is interesting, rather than imagine we supported individuals as early as possible to understand these incredible unique ways of processing and seeing the world, and then just going, do you know what you could do? The use cases for this. These are the opportunities. And, it fascinates me. It excites me. And I think by sharing this information and by enabling people to understand your journey, your experience, how it's impacted you, to share it in a funny, exciting, innovative way, and with good writing, I think is fantastic, and something that everybody should hear about. And obviously, that's why we're here today. So, what is the next thing for you, Sadie? Now you've written this. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning, right? How do you see the future?
I'm really interested in sort of this larger question of how scientists are beginning to study subjective experience and how, because for a long time, really at least 100 years, we've assumed that subjectivity can't be studied objectively by scientists. But with a lot of the aphantasia research, they're doing all of these very clever things to verify or disprove what we claim is going on in our mind's eye. And so, for instance, there's a great study where they had people who could visualize and people who can't imagine a bright sort of, it was a bright colored square, and the actual pupils contracted of the people who could visualize, just almost as if they were looking into a real bright light, and your pupil responded to imaginary light. And most people cannot contract and dilate their pupils on demand, so it's a subconscious response, which is super interesting. And then another one that I love was about, they were reading, you had to read a passage about a shark attack, and the visualizers got all sweaty, and the aphants did not, because we don't visualize the shark attack. It's just words on a page. And so, yeah, so obviously we're approaching books really differently. Like, I love reading, but I'm obviously getting a completely different experience reading than someone who can visualize. And now I think this is why I read very, very fast, because again, it's just like semantic processing, and I'm not bringing in these sort of sense memories. But yeah, so that's what I'm really interested in, is how scientists are studying subjective experience, because wouldn't it be amazing if we could figure out what it's like to be another human being, or what it's like to be an animal like a dog or a bat, and so what I've been doing recently is sort of setting up the groundwork, hopefully, to write stories about people who have really unusual experiences, but maybe not as unusual as we think. So have you ever heard of Alice in Wonderland syndrome?
No.
Okay, it's this thing where people have so this is not a hallucination, it's called an illusion. Basically, it's where you perceive something in the outside world, but it doesn't compute properly, and so something weird happens. And so this is actually pretty common among people with migraines and also children. I want to say like there's like a 20% lifetime prevalence rate across everyone, so it's not totally uncommon. And it's this experience where maybe your hand looks or feels gigantic, huge hands, and you feel like your body is tiny, or maybe sometimes you feel like the whole world is huge and you're tiny. And people sometimes feel like their neck is like really elongated. And so there's all of these sort of body perception like quirks and glitches that can happen, and these things can tell us a lot about how the brain processes where you are in space and in the world. And yeah, so I'm interviewing these people. Oh my gosh, I'm also interviewing, I just talked to this truck driver who has this really crazy distortion where so it turns out that when we just look at things, it feels effortless. It feels like you're literally just absorbing what's in front of you. But vision is it's a lot of work. Your brain is pulling apart the world and pasting it back together, and so fast you obviously don't even notice it. And your brain is editing out every blink. When you blink, you don't even notice your blinks most of the time, because your brain just edits it out. Your brain is constantly just making a nice, smooth experience for you. And sometimes it messes up in these really interesting ways. So there's this disorder called hemi-PMO, where half of people's faces seem to be melting and half of them are normal. And it's because your brain literally splits faces in half, like cuts them out of the scene, splits them in half, sends them to opposite hemispheres for processing, and then brings them back together in your left hemisphere. And if at some point in the process that goes awry, you can end up with half faces melting all around you.
Wow, that's pretty scary.
Yeah.
Well,
But what's this truck driver though, he discovered, or he was working with an optometrist, and they discovered that if he wore tinted lenses, so his problem wasn't melting faces, his problem was demon faces. People's ears and eyes got pulled really far backwards and got pointy and really scary looking. But if he puts on green tinted glasses, it makes the faces more normal. And if he puts on red tinted glasses, it makes the faces way worse.
I can imagine. Well, what's interesting with all of that is my wife has migraines and she gets visual aura,
Oh,
which is only a percentage of those with migraines gets the visual aura.
yeah.
And so there's another element, right, to connecting with the way that the brain is processing information, and the visual aura is so disorientating. It is, you can't move. Sometimes it's very difficult then for hours after to be able to do anything because it's so impactful in terms of
Yeah.
what you're experiencing. And it sounds similar to the bigger head, the hands. There's just the whole visual element of what's happening there is can be completely disabling. And then
Yeah.
I talk about it a bit too much, but High Contrast, who's synesthetic, and he
Oh,
has colors come to his mind's eye when he listens to certain sounds, and
yeah.
that's why he creates incredible music as a musician, because
Yeah.
he knows a good sound because these lights come to his mind's eye as he hears these sounds. And again, this is the use case, right, of this thing that's happening to me. I found a benefit in it, which is it happens when I hear these incredible sounds, or it may be annoying sounds, or whatever. But to do something with that, I found fascinating. Uh,
Synesthetes I'm so interested in them because they're so different from me, right? My senses are very streamlined. They do not get mixed up. Um, but what's fun about synesthetes is number one, they also just make this assumption that everyone else's inner life and perceptions are about the same as their own. So they'll meet someone and they'll be like, yeah, like obviously the number one is red, like obviously, because it's just like so consistent. It's across their whole lifetime. And sometimes they'll meet another synesthete who'll be like, no, one is blue. Like, what are you talking about? And then like a third person will be like, you're both need mental health, so like it's
yeah.
just such a really different way of experiencing ideas even.
Yeah, and then somebody else come and go, I have no idea what you're on about numbers and colors. It's it's sounds, or it's something else, or it's
Right,
and
right.
also
There's so many. Yeah.
yeah, and industrial movements, the feelings, the way that it can be a wide variety of things. But this is what is so exciting, right? The reality of starting to tap into the human mind, and the incredible way that we're seeing and processing the world is exciting. When we can really start to understand it and benefit from these unique, incredible experiences. The other thing is, in reality, you mentioned 100 years. Like, let's just go back another 100 years, and we think about industrialization, globalization. We think about, I talk about mines to Minecraft and factories to Facebook. We've gone from this world of trees and fields and hunting and gathering, and in just 200 years we've built all these skyscrapers and we live in these big cities, or we literally have transformed the world in such an unbelievable way in the last 200 years. And yet we expect these brains that have taken 300,000 years since they got big to all of a sudden accept these worlds we built in 200 years. It's
Right.
absolutely ridiculous that really our unique, quirky, strange brains are not the strange things in this situation. Those great big buildings and bright lights and noisy environments and factories that we squeeze people into, that they're the weird stuff, right? And no wonder our
Yeah.
brains are like, what are these swirly carpets? I'm not liking these. I find it disorientating because
Yeah.
so I'm fascinated by that as well. The fact that we can change our environments, right? Much easier than changing our brains. I'd rather keep my brain.
Yeah. It's so interesting because, I mean, people with different neurodiversities were obviously like often very, very different from one another. But I think that there are a few things we all have in common. And one of them is I think we tend to be pretty innovative because we're used to living in a world that was built for brains that are really different than ours. So when we encounter a problem, at least I think at least, yeah. So when we encounter a problem, we're like, okay, like let's come up with some creative workarounds for this. And but I think that another thing also is that I don't know if you can think of any examples in yourself, but I'm always surprised when my like really brilliant innovations like don't take off like wildfire, and then I'm like, oh right, other people don't need this. you know Have you ever had anything like that where you're like, I've solved it, and then everyone, you're like, no one else cares.
All the time, every day, at least 1,000 times a day, honestly. But it's not just, it's also because often my thinking is 10 miles down the road and I can't even fully describe it. I can just see it so clear. Well, I can see it so clearly in my mind's eye. I can
Yeah.
visualize it and I know what it, and then to try and help somebody else understand that. Sometimes they're bored because I've spent 10 minutes trying to explain to them, and already they're like, I don't know what language you're talking, what planet you're on, let alone what problem you're trying to solve. So I think there's a lot of that as well. I think that's somewhere where I think what we're talking about here is it's a new language. We are still trying to understand that language. When I say we, I mean those who are impacted by concepts around neurodiversity and neuroscience, who may have faced barriers or new understandings around the wonderful brain. So when I talk about we in that context, we still don't fully understand the language we're using, and yet we're trying to communicate to the rest of the world through that language, and the rest of the world don't understand that language. And I find this is part of that journey that we can get frustrated that we're not moving quickly enough in terms of this concept and people's understanding. But we have to also understand that we need to come back a few steps. Whilst we explore this new language, we need to bring other people with us and understand that they have no understanding of this language. And I think that is a nice way for us to move forwards as a community, as a neurodiversity community movement, science within this space, is that I think that is interested in these topics. But we need to move
I
a
was
bit
just thinking,
slower to help
I think
people.
it's so cool what you do helping workplaces be more accommodating because in part because it's really being more flexible and thinking about the diversity of human cognition and experience is going to benefit everyone, even someone who is 100% neurodiverse. They're going to appreciate more flexibility and who knows, like, dress codes and that kind of thing that are actually kind of probably pretty stupid and not that important. So yeah, so this is all to say that, it's the curb cut effect where, you cut the curbs to help people in wheelchairs specifically, but then it turns out to be great for everyone. And I do think what you were saying before about modernity sort of outpacing human brain ability to adapt, is very correct. And I think that is why, with mental health, like it's like you'll hear skeptics like my parents, boomers, say, well, everyone thinks they're neurodiverse. Everyone thinks they have depression. Everyone thinks they have anxiety. And it's like, they do have it. Like, this is real. This is a public health problem because of the environment we all live in. And it's clearly we need to make some adjustments so we can be happy and effective.
Absolutely. And you're right. It's easy to brush it aside as either that doesn't affect me. Well, it affects everybody because as human beings, we've got to live with one another, right? So we should be looking for the best way to accommodate one another. But also, I think, if people are hurting, we need to do better by them because ultimately these are incredible minds that do brilliant work. And if we lose individuals from society, from governments, from organizations, then we are going to miss out on lots more. So if people want to connect with you, if they want to, get your book, if they want to find out more about what Sadie's up to next, what should they do? Where should they go?
Well, my website is a good start. It's sadied.com, and I have lots of tests up. So if you think that you might have one of these rare neurodivergences like left-right confusion, topographical disorientation, face blindness, you can take tests. I just linked to researchers' tests. And yeah, and then also you can join little neuro communities and get my book if you're interested.
Amazing. That's brilliant. Well, I will put some of the links in the show notes. And listen, it's been absolutely fascinating, non-stop. I clearly could just go on for much longer. But I think the answer here is go find out more via Sadie. If you're interested, read more through a book and the rest of the content that she shares. I'm fascinated to go and explore more about you and the work that you've been doing now, Sadie. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure and energy raising for sure.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great chatting with you. And your very broad-ranging brain.
Yes. Chaos. My chaos in my head. Yes, I agree. Lovely. Thank you so much, Sadie.
Have a great day.